Welcome to this edition of Market Mantra, in which we give you a complete update on the economic, business and stock market news of the day. I am Anubha Rohatgi and with me is my co-anchor in Hindi, Vishal Sharma.
नमस्कार, मार्केट मंत्र में आप सभी का स्वागत। प्रतिदिन की तरह आज भी हम आर्थिक, व्यापारिक और शेयर बाजार से जुड़े ताजा समाचार आप तक लाएंगे और साथ ही उन पर चर्चा भी करेंगे। चर्चा के लिए कार्यक्रम में आज ऑनलाइन आमंत्रित हैं वरिष्ठ आर्थिक विशेषज्ञ जयंता दास। जयंता नमस्कार, कार्यक्रम में आपका स्वागत है।
नमस्कार।
और सबसे पहले अंग्रेजी में हेडलाइंस के साथ अनुभा।
Thank you, Vishal. Union Cabinet approves Pradhan Mantri Swasthya Suraksha Nidhi, a non-lapsable fund to be used for enhancement of universal and affordable health. Benchmark domestic stocks rise 0.5%, Sensex closes at 51,280, Nifty settles at 15,175. And Brent crude prices rise to trade around $67.60 per barrel.
केंद्रीय मंत्रिमंडल ने प्रधानमंत्री स्वास्थ्य सुरक्षा निधि को मंजूरी दी। प्रमुख घरेलू शेयर बाजारों में 0.5% से अधिक की बढ़त। सेंसेक्स 51,280 पर हुआ बंद। निफ्टी 15,175 के स्तर पर पहुंचा और ब्रेंट कच्चे तेल के दाम बढ़कर $67.60 प्रति बैरल के आसपास।
Let's begin with the important decision taken by the Union Cabinet today. The Union Cabinet today approved the Pradhan Mantri Swasthya Suraksha Nidhi, a single non-lapsable reserve fund for share of health from the proceeds of health and education cess levied under Finance Act 2007. The major benefit of PM-SSN will be enhanced access to universal and affordable health care through availability of earmarked resources, while ensuring that the amount does not lapse at the end of the financial year. The accruals into the PM-SSN will be utilized for the flagship schemes of the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, namely Ayushman Bharat, Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, Ayushman Bharat Health and Wellness Centers and National Health Mission and Pradhan Mantri Swasthya Suraksha Yojana. Jayanta, after the budget allocation for health, now this is another positive development for the health sector, especially given the present scenario of COVID pandemic. How important do you think it is for building health infrastructure that is badly needed?
The universal healthcare has been one of the major flagship objectives of the government, if I may say so. It's, I think, one of the top 3 priorities. And the idea was to, cover right from, the person who is in the lowest rate of income society to almost everyone, in terms of rural as well as urban poor and everyone. I guess this is a forward-looking approach in terms of what the government intends to do in terms of providing health benefits, specifically in a year where we were actually, face to face with the pandemic and the effects of pandemic and to what extent the pandemic had affected us. Both in terms of hospital expenses or well as in terms of in-home, healthcare expenses. So I guess this step and this approval would take a big step forward in, extending the government's overall objective of providing universal healthcare.
And it's not just providing universal healthcare. The healthcare also indirectly affects the economy as well, because then it will have an impact on the economy as well.
Well, there is no doubt, and I think there is no doubt in terms of what a healthy nation, not only the expenses the government will do on the healthcare side, but what a healthy nation can generate. Because what we tend to forget is when we discuss GDP numbers, when we discuss economic growth, it's also important to have a nation which is, both covered in terms of its health expenses or as well as in terms of health issues. So I guess that's the collateral benefit, obviously, which is a no-brainer to understand. But in addition to that, I believe creation of healthcare sector also have multilateral advantages in various ways. The first comes in terms of the triggering of expenses, which will help create the ecosystem, which will help create the infrastructure, as well as build up an important medical fraternity in terms of health workers, in terms of healthcare specialists, etc. Also, we must add that if the government is spending so much in healthcare, there would be parallel spending happening in healthcare training. Now, this creates a whole world of opportunities which are not just limited to India, because if you look at very closely, over the last 2 months post-pandemic, nations like UK, nations like Japan, as well as some 7 to 8 more other nations, they have a huge demand for the healthcare workers because they are facing a huge deficit in their own home world. So I think that's the other area which opens up for India as an opportunity to do job placements and all. So I guess one can talk for hours in terms of immediate benefits as well as the direct and indirect benefits this particular step that the government can take forward.
और अब बात करते हैं शेयर बाजार की। मिले जुले वैश्विक संकेतों के बीच प्रमुख घरेलू शेयर बाजारों में आज 0.5% से अधिक की बढ़त दर्ज हुई। बॉम्बे स्टॉक एक्सचेंज का सेंसेक्स 0.5% की वृद्धि से 254 अंक उछलकर 51,280 पर बंद हुआ। नेशनल स्टॉक एक्सचेंज का निफ्टी भी 0.51% की बढ़त दर्ज करके 76 अंक बढ़कर 15,175 पर जा पहुंचा। व्यापक बाजार में भी बढ़त देखी गई। बीएसई मिड कैप इंडेक्स में 0.77%, जबकि स्मॉल कैप इंडेक्स में 0.95% की बढ़त रही।
The benchmark domestic stocks today logged gains of 0.5% amid mixed global cues. The BSE Sensex rose 254 points or 0.5% to finish at 51,280, and the NSE Nifty climbed 76 points or 0.51% to close at 15,175. The broader market at BSE also appreciated, outperforming the Sensex. The BSE Mid Cap Index gained 0.77% and the BSE Small Cap Index surged 0.95%. In the Sensex pack, shares of 23 companies gained while 7 logged losses. Bajaj Finance was the top gainer as it gained 2.3%, followed by Sun Pharma which surged 2.2%. Tech Mahindra and Axis Bank both gained around 2%. Bajaj Auto added 1.8%. On the other side, ONGC lost the most as it slipped 2.1%. Kotak Bank lost 0.9% and the ITC fell 0.6%. HDFC Bank, Power Grid and Reliance slipped 0.4% each. And talking of the sectoral indices, 15 out of 19 sectors logged gains. Metal sector stocks were top gainers as they added 1.8%. IT and tech both gained around 1.5%, while consumer durables, healthcare and basic materials were other sectoral indices which closed with gains of more than 1%. On the other hand, oil and gas declined 0.9%, while utilities fell 0.6%. The overall breadth of the BSE trade was positive as shares of 1,629 companies gained, while 1,350 fell. Shares of 178 companies remained unchanged. Jayanta, your initial comment, straight third session of the markets gaining today.
Well, I guess the specific positive moves related to this week can have a major, a result is because of the $1.9 trillion package approval by the U.S. government, and which I guess the Senate has passed, and the remaining House will pass it today.
Yes.
Now, that would have its positive ramifications world over. In addition to that, we also have specific performances by the IT as well as the banking sector in terms of taking the domestic interest forward. A result of which we saw FIIs have been net buyers as well as domestic investors also have been net buyers over the last 2 days. And in fact, if you look closely at the numbers, what we also see is a huge broad base of stocks moving up, not just limited to the large caps or even the Sensex stocks. So I guess that speaks that there is some depth in the market when we are speaking of an upswing. However, from these levels, I believe if we take a call for a rally to happen, Nifty somewhere has to do a sustained break at 15,300 levels. But on the whole, the market has held on to 50,000 plus levels, which I guess is an extremely positive factor for investors who are there invested in the stock market.
और जनता, अगर हम मिड कैप और स्मॉल कैप शेयरों की बात करें तो यहाँ पर जो है अब क्या हम लीनियर ग्रोथ देखेंगे आने वाले समय में, क्यों, या फिर ये जो वॉलेटिलिटी है कभी आउट परफॉर्म करता है सेंसेक्स को व्यापक बाजार या कभी अंडर परफॉर्म रहता है, तो ये वॉलेटिलिटी बनी रहेगी मिड कैप और स्मॉल कैप सेक्टर में, या एक लीनियर ग्रोथ देखने को मिलेगी आने वाले वक्त में?
देखिए, अक्सर अगर आप देखिए ट्रेंड वाइज मिड कैप और स्मॉल कैप क्षेत्र में जब एक पॉजिटिव ग्रोथ का नजर आता है ब्रॉड बेस में और लगातार एक सस्टेन मोड में होता है, तो जब वो होता है तब ये हमें एक दिशा निर्देश करते हैं कि लार्ज कैप किस दिशा में दौड़ रहा है या ओवरऑल मार्केट का सेंसेक्स किस दिशा में दौड़ रहा है। उसके बाद धीरे धीरे रैली जब ब्रॉड बेस होता है तो लोगों का रुचि, खास करके यहाँ पे निवेशकों का रुचि स्मॉल कैप्स में या मिड कैप्स में जाके शुरुआत होते हैं। लेकिन हमारा जो श्रोतागण है, खास करके खुदरा निवेशकों को, उनको सावधानी से इस वक्त निवेश करने बहुत जरूरी है, इसलिए क्योंकि स्मॉल कैप या मिड कैप क्षेत्र में जिस तरह का वोलेटिलिटी होता है, काफी आकर्षित होते हैं लोग, गलत तरीका से आकर्षित होता है, जहां पे लगता है कि भाई यहाँ पे रातों रात जिस तरह का वृद्धि हो रहा है, शायद हम भी कुछ 2 पैसा का अलग से पूंजी लगा दे और हम इस वृद्धि को उम्मीद करें। तो इस वक्त सतर्कता का भी बहुत जरूरी है जब आप निवेश कर रहे हो उसका पालन करना। और साथ में ये भी आपको समझना है कि किसी भी स्तर पे मैं मानता हूँ मार्केट में प्रवेश करना का हमेशा एक अपॉर्चुनिटी रहता है, और उस अपॉर्चुनिटी का आपको सही रूप से आप तब कर पाएंगे जब आपका जो इन्वेस्टमेंट होराइजन या इन्वेस्टमेंट का जो ऑब्जेक्टिव है वो सही रूप से अलाइन होता है, आपका किस हद तक कौन क्षेत्र विशेष में जाके आप प्रवेश करेंगे या निवेश करेंगे। तो ऐसा स्थिति पे बहुत जरूरी है समझना कि ये जो स्मॉल कैप और मिड कैप क्षेत्र में एक जो रनअवे जो ग्रोथ या रनअवे स्विंग जो हो रहे हैं इससे थोड़ा बच के रहिए, और बेशक आप जब निवेश करना चाहेंगे तो आप कंपनी के ऊपर अलग से रिसर्च जैसे जारी होता है हर निवेशक को करना चाहिए, वो करें और उसके बाद ही निवेश करें।
ओवरऑल सेंसस की बात करें तो अभी जो हाल ही में जो एमफी के जो आंकड़े आए हैं फरवरी महीने के, जो इक्विटी बेस्ड म्यूचुअल फंड से निवेशकों ने फरवरी महीने में 4,534 करोड़ रुपए निकाले हैं, और उन्होंने ये निवेश जो है इसका कुछ हिस्सा डेट म्यूचुअल फंड्स में किया है, लगभग 1735 करोड़ रुपए का। तो शेयरों में जो ये कहा जा रहा है कि अनुमान से अधिक तेजी देखने को मिल रही है, तो क्या निवेशक अब सतर्क हो गए हैं? क्या आपको लगता है कि मार्केट में आगे चल के कोई बड़ा करेक्शन देखने को मिलेगा हमें?
देखिए, मार्केट में एक तो बड़ा करेक्शन इस वक्त कहना मुश्किल है, और वो करेक्शन कितना डीप होगा। वजह इसलिए कि मार्केट काफी लंबा दौर चलते रहे लगातार, और बीच बीच में हम लोग 2-4 दिन का हमने करेक्शन भी देखे हैं, लेकिन जिस तरह का लोग उम्मीद कर रहे हैं कि एक मेजर करेक्शन हो और वो करेक्शन सस्टेन्ड हो जहां पे निवेशक भी चाहते हैं कि दोबारा री एंटर करे कोई के क्षेत्र विशेष स्टॉक्स में, तो शायद वो इमीडिएटली उम्मीद नहीं है, क्योंकि उसके लिए एक ट्रिगर चाहिए आपको मेजर करेक्शन के लिए। इस वक्त अगर आपको देखना है, जैसे आपने कहा म्यूचुअल फंड में जो अलग से लोगों ने एग्जिट किया म्यूचुअल फंड से ओवरऑल, जिसमें रीएलोकेशन ऑफ रिसोर्सेज हुआ है, यानी कि लोग वहां से पूंजी निकल के क्षेत्र विशेष में, सेक्टर विशेष में, खास करके स्टॉक विशेष में जाके अपना पैसा सीधे लगाया हुआ है। क्योंकि मार्केट में अगर रुचि नहीं रहता तो मार्केट 50,000 के ऊपर इतना लंबा सस्टेन नहीं होते। तो उसमें मैं मानता हूं कि रीएलोकेशन ऑफ रिसोर्सेज की वजह से कुछ डेट फंड में पैसा गया हुआ है, कुछ अलग से डायरेक्ट निवेश लोग अलग से करने का पसंद किए हैं। वो मानते हैं कि इस वक्त मार्केट में कोई भी स्टॉक में अगर मैं मोटा मोटी अच्छे स्टॉक्स में अगर लगाऊं पैसा, तो उसमें मेरा उम्मीद फसल का इमीडिएटली फायदा का उम्मीद बहुत रातों रात हमें हो सकता है, हफ्ता 2 हफ्ते के अंदर हो सकता है। ऐसी स्थिति में लोगों को खास करके खुदरा निवेशकों का अलग से रुचि रहता है कि डायरेक्ट इन्वेस्ट करके कुछ अलग से लाभ उठाए, लेकिन ये लॉन्ग टर्म ट्रेंड नहीं होता है। जो लॉन्ग टर्म ट्रेंड है वो फिर से वापस म्यूचुअल फंड में जाके लोग वहां पे म्यूचुअल फंड का द्वारा निवेश करने का कोशिश करते हैं, लेकिन म्यूचुअल फंड का रिटर्न जो होते हैं मार्केट में हमेशा रिटर्न के एवरेज रिटर्न आते हैं। तो ये देखते हुए मैं मानता हूं कि ये जो एलोकेशन में रीएलोकेशन ऑफ रिसोर्सेज जो पूंजी का हुआ है, ये उसका बेसिस में हुआ है। ऐसा नहीं कि मार्केट में अलग से कुछ करेक्शन का खतरा अलग से है। डीप करेक्शन के लिए आपको मेजर कुछ ट्रिगर्स चाहिए, और उस वक्त मैं नहीं मानता हूं कि ऐसा कुछ ट्रिगर अगले 2-3 हफ्ता या 4 हफ्ते के अंदर कुछ हम उम्मीद कर सकते हैं, अनलेस देयर इज सम जियोपॉलिटिकल टेंशन हैपनिंग या उस तरह का कुछ हो।
Jayanta, moving beyond the stock market, now the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, has come out with certain figures which are very promising for India. It has projected that the Indian economy will bounce back to grow at 12.6% in the financial year 2022, which is the highest among the G20 countries. And in fact, for the present fiscal also, OECD has estimated that the GDP will contract by 7.4%, whereas earlier it had made the projection to be 8%. How do you view this? I mean, in the background of, CRISIL has also come out with positive figures. IMF has earlier come out with positive figures for Indian economy.
The Indian recovery, specifically in the third fiscal, as well as, I guess, figures of the fourth fiscal will also come in the next 6 weeks to 8 weeks, has been remarkable to say the least, because the expectations, have been far surpassed in terms of recoveries which are happening. And not only that, in specific sectors, sectors like IT, they have done exceedingly well. Sectors like bank, sectors like pharma, they all have done exceedingly well in terms of their figures, in terms of the balance sheet. So taking a cue from them, obviously the recovery mode is not sustained. There's no doubt in terms of how the recovery will happen or how fast it will happen. So that has been put to rest. Now what's important to understand is the vaccination drive. So there should be a bigger momentum than what it is happening right now. And I think government is trying its level best in terms of having that vaccine reached to every single Indian citizen in the fastest manner possible. So that would be an important barometer in terms of understanding where the economy will go from here. So as I said, 10 to 12% I don't think it's an impossible figure to achieve on a lower base. But putting aside the statistical impression of what Indian growth story is, what's important to understand is the growth has to be a broad-based growth and not limited or led by only a few sectors. So that's an important factor which we need to look after.
Yeah, that is what I was exactly coming out for. That there is a worry about what will. I mean, we are talking about a broader perspective, but what about small businesses? What about the urban poor? What about labor-intensive, small enterprise-driven segments such as gems and jewelry and garments? I mean, it's going to take some time for these these sectors to come out of the pandemic effects.
See, that's what I said. It has to be a broad-based growth, and to understand the broad-based growth, we have to understand the recovery happens not only just into a specific sector, but across other sectors also. Now, there will be some sectors which will be taking more than its usual time, to come in and, go in for this growth. But as I said, there will be some good sectors to lead this particular growth, and I think that's already happening on the ground.
One last question about this OECD projections. Now, in comparison to India, OECD has estimated that China will grow by 7.8% in 2021-22. Now, given that the Chinese economy is so much more, bigger than ours, how do you look at this figure?
Well, China, India, specifically in the Asian region, would be an important player to understand in terms of how the growth story will happen from here. But having said that, what's also important to understand that, China can't alone carry forward the bucket of growth. It has to happen regionally across countries and across nations which are part of the Asian subcontinent. So taking a figure from there, it's important to understand that it's very critical for China also to bounce back in an impressive manner to ensure that growth story to get in a sustained manner globally.
Right. Moving on, the rupee today rose marginally by 2 paisa to 72 rupees and 91 paisa against the US dollar. The domestic unit appreciated amid gains in the domestic stocks. The dollar index, which indicates the US dollar's strength against a basket of 6 other leading currencies, also rose 0.17% to 92.11 in intraday trade.
और बात एशियाई बाजारों की कर लें। अधिकतर एशियाई बाजार आज सीमित दायरे में कारोबार करते हुए नुकसान के साथ बंद हुए। हालांकि हांगकांग का हैंग सेंग 0.5% की बढ़त के साथ बंद हुआ। जापान का निकेई मामूली बढ़त दर्ज करके लगभग सपाट बंद हुआ। वहीं दूसरी तरफ चीन का शंघाई कंपोजिट सूचकांक 0.1% फिसल गया। दक्षिण कोरिया के कोस्पी में 0.6% की गिरावट रही और सिंगापुर का स्ट्रेट्स टाइम्स इंडेक्स लगभग 1% के नुकसान के साथ बंद हुआ। यूरोपीय बाजारों की बात करें तो अंतर्देशीय कारोबार में कोई बड़ा उतार चढ़ाव नहीं देखा गया। लंदन के फुटसी में 0.3% की गिरावट रही। हालांकि फ्रांस का कैक 0.2% और जर्मनी का डेक्स 0.4% की बढ़त में रहे।
Moving on to the US markets, the US stocks gained yesterday with the Nasdaq jumping over 3% to recoup its losses in the previous session as US bond yields retreated and investors picked up battered technology stocks. The Dow Jones Industrial Average added marginally by 0.1%, the S&P 500 climbed 1.4% and the Nasdaq Composite Index surged 3.7%. Jento, we discussed this point earlier also in the Money Matters program, but for the listeners who were not tuned in at that point of time, how do you explain the fact that the US markets gained yesterday and the Asian markets, which take a cue from the overnight, trading in US markets, they closed flat today with losses today?
Well, the Asian markets for the last 2 days and today is the third day has opened on a positive note based on the fact that the US, package is going to get through. So I wouldn't be, actually losing sleep much in terms of any intraday profit booking which has happened over there, which is more likely the scenario than any other specific reason for, the Asian markets to get challenged at this point of time.
Right. Moving on to the commodities, oil prices today added marginally as OECD forecast for the global economic recovery and OPEC plus oil output curbs supported the crude prices. But US inventories checked the rise. In intraday trade, Brent crude prices were trading around $67.60 per barrel, while the WTI crude prices were around $64.20 per barrel. Jento, now the international crude prices today added a marginal bit, but for the last 3 sessions they had been, falling. So can we expect, and here in India, of course, for the last few days the fuel prices have held steady. Given the fact that the oil prices are on the, going a bit in the south, can the domestic consumers expect some relief in the coming days?
See, oil have always, acted strangely, and specifically this upsurge in oil has been more because of, the threat of attacks on the Brent crude. So, taking a cue from that, I do believe that yes, it's important to understand that whether the Indian economy will take a brunt. I guess the oil prices, given the present scenario, will be stabilizing around $70-75 level.
Right.
और अब बात सराफा बाजार की करें। घरेलू सराफा बाजार में आज सोने और चांदी की चमक फीकी रही। मल्टी कमोडिटी एक्सचेंज में अप्रैल वायदा सोने का मूल्य 140 रुपए गिरकर 44,720 रुपए प्रति 10 ग्राम पर आ गया। मार्च महीने के लिए चांदी का वायदा मूल्य 700 रुपए टूटकर 66,780 रुपए प्रति किलो पर रहा। उधर न्यूयॉर्क मर्केंटाइल एक्सचेंज में सोने का मूल्य गिरावट के साथ $1,708.80 प्रति औंस के आसपास रहा। चांदी भी टूटकर $25.80 प्रति औंस के स्तर पर आ गई। जनता अगर सोने की मूल्यों की बात करें तो अभी जो है ये गिरावट देखी जा रही है और अपने उच्चतम स्तर से लगभग 12,000 के आसपास अब तक की गिरावट आ चुकी है। तो ये गिरावट का दौर अब जबकि अमेरिका में बॉन्ड यील्ड में नरमी के संकेत मिल रहे हैं और क्या ऐसे में अब गोल्ड की कीमतों को सपोर्ट मिलेगा आगे?
मैं मानता हूँ कि गोल्ड इन्वेस्टमेंट पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू आने वाला मिड टर्म, खास करके शॉर्ट टर्म नहीं, बेशक मिड टर्म देखते हुए गोल्ड इज स्टिल इम्पोर्टेंट मेटल इन्वेस्टमेंट टू डू। और ऐसा स्थिति में बेशक आपने बात सही कहा कि इस वक्त गोल्ड का सपोर्ट कहाँ जाकर शुरू होंगे। तो जिस तरह का 12 से 14% के करीब या 20% के करीब जो गोल्ड का जो सबसे पीक था, उसमें जो गिरावट हुआ है कि गोल्ड इस वक्त इन्वेस्टमेंट का दौर से मैं मानता हूँ एज अ मिडिल टर्म, मान सके नॉट अ शॉर्ट टर्म इन्वेस्टमेंट प्लान, बट एज अ मिड टर्म इन्वेस्टमेंट प्लान अभी भी काफी अच्छा और अट्रैक्टिव धातु में आता है।
Jayant, coming back to the stock markets, what do you see as what is your prediction for the outlook for the mid cap and the small cap index sectors?
Well, typically the momentum would take a bit longer in terms of what's happening in the mid cap and small cap sector at this point of time. However, part of the rallies are also being driven by a lot of speculation which is happening by intraday traders and all. So, for a retail investor, one should be very cautious about when and how he's trying to invest and whether, as I said, the basket looks a very promising basket to invest in with exceedingly short-term and fantastic returns. But then this is also time when one should exercise caution, specifically in these two sectors.
And what about sector-wise outlook for in the coming days? Which sectors do you see performing, well?
This depends on your investment, appetite. And as I said, invest in safe sectors always as an investment destination for yourself. And overall, if you see, it's important to understand that specifically, traditional sectors which have got good returns and all will have an overall, better returns in terms of opportunity.
And it's also a fact that given we were talking about the volatility in the mid cap and small cap, sectors earlier in the program, the volatility is becoming a big challenge for the investors now.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, I'm saying that as we were discussing earlier in the program, we also discussed the volatility in the, so it's a big challenge for the investors. The volatility in the mid cap and small cap index, it's a big challenge for the investors also.
See, typically, as I said, if there is an alignment in terms of your objectives of investment with what returns you're expecting, the challenges become much more easier to handle, specifically if you're investing in, well-researched stocks and well-researched companies. Now, if you blindly invest, so even in, really, increasing markets or fantastically performing markets, those risks will remain, those challenges will remain. So, as I always have said, for our investors, always go in for well-informed decisions, always go in for decisions that can, see to it that at least your principal amount of money is safe. And don't go in for any abnormal returns from the market, because that will never happen. And to quote, the initial returns from globally as always, shown, don't expect over 18 to 18% returns from the market, however well the markets are acting or reacting.
जयंत, अगर सेक्टर वाइज बात करें तो खासतौर पर ऑटो सेक्टर की बात करें तो ऑटो सेक्टर में अभी जो है जो कॉमर्शियल वाहनों की जो बिक्री है उसमें तो इजाफा दिख रहा है, लेकिन जो घरेलू जो दोपहिया वाहनों की बिक्री में कमी आई है, ये क्या संकेत दे रही है?
देखिए, मैं मानता हूँ खास करके टू व्हीलर सेक्शन में अगर कोविड का दौरान एक्सपोर्ट मार्केट में कोई उस तरह से कमी और उस तरह से गिरावट नहीं आया है, और खास करके जो 2 या 3 लार्जेस्ट टू व्हीलर प्रोड्यूसर है वर्ल्ड का हमारा देश में, उसमें अगर आप उनका फिगर्स भी आप देखें तो उन्होंने कहा खास करके कि घरेलू बाजार में गिरावट हुई है, लेकिन एक्सपोर्ट बाजार में मोर और लेस सस्टेन डिमांड रहा। यदि उछाल नहीं आया डिमांड का, लेकिन सस्टेन डिमांड का वजह से ये जो कोरोना का टाइम में जो स्थिति था, वो स्थिति वो लोग सामना कर पाए। तो ऐसा स्थिति में अभी ये भी देखना है, समझना है कि मार्केट में एक बहुत बड़ा चर्न आ रहा है, और वो चर्न खास करके आ रहा है आपका इलेक्ट्रिक व्हीकल देखते हुए। हम सबको पता है कि ओला जैसा कंपनी भी एक वर्ल्ड का लार्जेस्ट टू व्हीलर इलेक्ट्रिक व्हीकल्स का भी एक फैक्ट्री लगा रहा है, और उन्होंने उत्पादन अगले 6 से 9 महीने के अंदर शुरू करने का वादे किए हैं। तो ऐसा स्थिति में इस मार्केट का जो चर्न है, उस चर्न का वजह से मैं मानता हूँ कि दोपहिया वाहनों का जो बिक्री है उसमें थोड़ा बहुत जो है स्थिरता या थोड़ा बहुत स्टेडीनेस तो कहना गलत होगा, लेकिन मैं मानता हूँ थोड़ा बहुत कमी इस वक्त आया है मार्केट रुचि में, और इसमें फिर से हम उछाल देख सकते हैं अगले तिमाही से, जब मानसून का सेशन आ जाएंगे। खास करके जिस क्षेत्र विशेष में दोपहिया वाहन का सबसे ज्यादा डिमांड होता है, उसमें हम अलग से कुछ उछाल देख सकते हैं।
Jayant, talking about the banking and finance sector stocks, they've been doing pretty well in the last few sessions as we've seen. But do you see are you looking at overpricing of these stocks?
See, we don't normally discuss stock specific, questions here.
A general prediction, what would you?
Yeah. See, I still believe banking is an extremely attractive sector. And let me come in with a disclaimer telling so that, this particular, I have a specific fascination for banking for decades, in terms of an investment destination, because whenever an economy grows, and in a fast developing economy, it's the banking sector which is one of the main, chases of the economy in that sense. So if you take a cue from there, obviously, both in public sector space as well as in private sector base, banks have performed phenomenally, despite the issues of NPAs and things like that, which are being handled quite well at this point of time.
Very quick question to you, Jayanto, which is nothing to do with stocks, but again economy related. Now the government is planning to scrap 6,000 compliance needs for companies by August 15 in an effort to improve the ease of doing business and ease of living. How do you see that this step by the government?
See, ease of doing business once again has been another focused area which this particular government has been obviously emphasizing on. And I believe some of the archaic rules guiding how to do businesses and things like that need to be revisited and re-scrapped and relooked, or even if not scrapped, at least restructured. So obviously it's a very forward-looking method. And right now, as we settle down and we face the new world, post-COVID era, it's important to understand there will be a huge shift in investment destinations. And India wants to, have a bigger pie of this shift specifically for investments which are coming into Asia. So taking a cue from there, I believe, yes, it's something which we all look forward to.
जी, जयंत दास, कार्यक्रम में शामिल होने और इतनी उपयोगी जानकारी देने के लिए आपका बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
And thank you, Jayanto. And before we close, a reminder of the headlines. Union Cabinet approves Pradhan Mantri Swasthya Suraksha Nidhi, a non-lapsable fund to be used for enhancement of universal and affordable health. Benchmark domestic stocks rise 0.5%. Sensex closes at 51,280. Nifty settles at 15,175. And Brent crude prices rise to trade around $67.60 per barrel. And that's it in this edition of Market Mantra with Vishal Sharma and Anubhav Rodgi. We are saying goodbye. Namaskar.